record on this computer. We are recording. Alrighty. So let's get started. So before we jump into bears, I always love to give people just kind of a background on what we do at Fish and Wildlife, because believe it or not, many Rhode Islanders don't even know that we have a state agency that deals with wildlife conservation here in the state. And just to give you a quick snippet of what we do, Gabby and I created this very fun video that we'd like to share. And this is a video that's made for children because it is for our Rhode Critter Kits program, which we're very excited. So if I can do a shameless plug for the Critter Kits program, these are educational curriculum kits for K through 8 educators, and that's both formal and informal educators. So if you know anybody who's working with K through 8 children, please tell them about this program. We're going to be running some training workshops in November to get people familiar with the materials. There's lesson plans, there's fun videos like this one, there's a bunch of activities and all sorts of things that you can do with students to connect them with Rhode Island's wildlife. So we are so excited to launch that. Without further ado, I'd like to just share a little bit of that with you and kind of kill two birds with one stone to explain the context of what we do for wildlife conservation here in the state. So Gabby, let me know if you can hear the audio because we were struggling with this earlier. All right, so let's hit play. Good, all right.
It's Gabby to Meillon here with the Division of Fish and Wildlife. I was just walking around the Great Swamp Management Area with Mary, but I seem to have lost her. I don't know where she went. Oh, there she is. Mary, what are you doing over there?
There's so many things to see here, so many cool plants and animals. It's amazing.
You're right, Mary. There's so much awesome wildlife in this management area. At the Division of Fish and Wildlife, we help protect over 60,000 acres of wildlife habitat across Rhode Island.
Well, Gabby, at the Division of Fish and Wildlife, our mission is to protect, restore, and manage wildlife populations and their habitats.
Oh yeah. Our division biologists do a lot of work to study wildlife to see what they need, so they can restore or rebuild and improve the habitat that they require.
When we're looking at populations of wild animals, sometimes we notice that there's too many of a particular animal or too few. This is where management comes in.
Management is all about keeping the balance, and that's one way that hunters help us. We set rules and regulations that allow hunters to take just a few animals from the population, and that actually helps the health of the entire population.
Hunters help out with conservation here in Rhode Island by buying their hunting license every year. The money from those hunting licenses comes straight back to the Division of Fish and Wildlife so that we can use it to support wildlife conservation in the state.
Remember, when hunters and sport shooters buy their firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment, a little piece of that money comes back to us to allow us to do more conservation work in Rhode Island. This is called the Wildlife and Sports Fish Restoration Program, and it's been around since 1937, allowing the entire country to help conserve more wildlife habitat and protect our species. I've lost Mary again. I don't know where she went. She just keeps wandering off. God. Oh, there she is. I swear if she wasn't wearing her fluorescent orange, no one would ever see her. We hope you get out there and enjoy Rhode Island's wildlife and their habitats too.
Turtle! Bird! Oh, there's a snake over here. Oh, I think there's a beaver in this wetland. This is so exciting. Gabby, are you excited?
I'm excited.
Okay, so now that you've met Gabby and I, and this is what we do, on a daily basis. We work a lot with students, and we hope that you'll share this with any teachers that you know, and learned a little bit about what we do in kind of a silly way. So I do apologize if the video was lagging a little bit. This was kind of a test run to see how this would work. But if you are interested in learning more about the Rhode Critter Kits or watching the videos, either with your kids, your grandkids, or if you're enjoy a whimsical, fun video about wildlife, they are all available on our YouTube channel. Just the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management is on YouTube. So we invite you to take a look at them. Okay. So Gabby, do you want to take a little minute to talk about management areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of already mentioned it in the video, but basically, the Division of Fish and Wildlife helps protect land all throughout Rhode Island. So we've got the map that was on the previous slide, and it has those green splotches that were everywhere, and those are our management areas throughout the state. So you may have visited one before and not even realized it. Our office is located at the Great Swamp Management Area, and then there's Arcadia, there's Big River, there's tons of them. They're all throughout the state. And on the next slide, you'll see it is hunting season right now. So you want to make sure that you're wearing your fluorescent orange. And so you need to wear that all the way from the beginning of September until the end of May. And then you don't have to wear it in the summertime. If you're wondering about where in the world you need to wear your orange, you can take a look in the chat. Mary's posted the DEM map room. And if you go to that link and then click on the RIDEM outdoor recreation map, it has all of our state management areas. So you have to wear orange in any state management area or undeveloped state park. And so you can click on those little blocks on the map and it'll tell you if it's a management area, if it's an undeveloped state park, or if it's a developed state park. So just make sure you wear that fluorescent orange there. And if you want to see another ridiculous video, we'll be posting another orange reminder video on our Facebook page probably this Friday. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Yeah, we like to have fun with with sharing our message. It's much more fun than just posting a picture of somebody in an orange vest. So we encourage you to keep an eye out on that. So I'm going to just exit out of this for a second and present again because it looks like it got me out of full screen. Okay. So now that we've kind of given you just a little bit of background info in a nutshell about us, let's jump into bears. So if anybody has gone to any of our virtual programs over the summer, you will know that I love trivia. Gabby loves trivia. So this is the way that we like to engage with you and to share some information. So let's answer some bear trivia questions. So we can type our answers in the chat and test your knowledge of bears. Okay, so I got a little carried away with the gifts of Winnie the Pooh too, so get ready. So question number 1, are black bears native to Rhode Island? So let's take a guess in the chat. Take just maybe like 15 to 30 seconds. Okay, so it's like a mixed bag here. We've got yes, no, back and forth, back and forth. So it's kind of, I'd say it's probably split pretty evenly amongst everybody guessing if they are native to Rhode Island. So if you answered yes, you are correct. So black bears are actually native to Rhode Island, and you can see in this map here on the left, this is the range of the American black bear before European settlement of North America. So they stretched all over the lower 48 and into Canada, all the way up to Alaska, and even into parts of Mexico. Now, after European settlement, the range shrunk considerably. And that's mainly because when the Europeans got here, they cut down a lot of our forest, created farmland, so that removed a ton of habitat for the bears. So when you have no habitat, you leave. Overhunting was a huge issue for bears because the settlers also did not appreciate larger animals with sharp teeth because they were afraid for their livestock and for their own safety. So there were bounties placed on animals like wolves, mountain lions, and bears. So through that persecution and overhunting, that was a huge detriment to our black bear population here in Rhode Island. And also angry farmers, you know, even besides being afraid of bears, bears are notorious for getting into crops and you know, whether that's vegetables, whether if you have a beehive, you may have had issues with bears in the past, and even just on occasion killing sheep or goats or small livestock. So the guess is that bears are probably wiped out in Rhode Island before the year 1800. So even this map doesn't even show, you know, doesn't show Rhode Island on the map. But now we're starting to see bears trickle back. Our forests have grown back, so that provides more habitat for them. And in Connecticut and Massachusetts, the bear populations are excellent. I muted myself by accident. So we're seeing, you know, Connecticut and Massachusetts are doing really well with their bear populations, and because they're doing so well, they're trickling here into Rhode Island. So as bears grow up, they disperse and they need to find a new place to live. So we're seeing kind of a resurgence of bears in the state, but we're not necessarily at a really high population yet. And Amy will talk more about that as well as we talk about the field study. So yes, they're native, they're natural. It's good that they're here. We're happy they're here. Okay, Gabby, want to take question number 2?
All right, so for our next trivia question, how much do black bears weigh? So go ahead and type your answers into the chat. How much do you think a black bear weighs? I should say not minutes to answer. All right, let's see. 400, 200, 150, 200, lots of 200s.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So I think let's go to the answer. We've got a bunch of really good answers.
Kind of all over the place. Let's see, what do we got?
All right, so you guys were pretty close. So the males are larger than the females. So the males weigh between 150 and 450 pounds. And then the females are smaller, weighing 100 to 250 pounds. But obviously the weight can vary depending on genetics and food availability. So if they, have more food resources, they can get larger, and they can get even larger than 450 pounds if they have ideal conditions. So they're pretty big, they are pretty large, but again, the adult males are the ones that are going to be the biggest. And those aren't necessarily the ones that we have in Rhode Island currently. Oh, someone said it. I don't even know what that number is.
Luca wrote like
a bajillion pounds.
Heroes.
A bajillion pounds. Not quite that heavy, but they can get pretty big.
Yeah, and Sarah just asked, that's not a real bear, is it? That is a real bear. That is a bear that was in someone's backyard. You can see he's got an ear tag. So this is a bear that's probably been tracked. I'm not sure what state this bear was from. I just cracked up when I saw the meme, because that is clearly a bear that is eating out of someone's trash can. So in other states, they do track them, track different bears that are coming around. Yeah, OMG, yes. All right, so question number 3, how big is a black bear's home range? So if I was a black bear, how far am I gonna wander and call that my home? So all animals have a home range that they kind of stay within. You can think of it kind of like your neighborhood, where you're gonna do all your stuff that you need to do. So we've got 5 miles, 100 miles, 150, 50 miles, 20 acres, 12 miles, 125 miles. Yeah, so we're kind of 20 square miles, 3 square miles, 10. All right. So our answer here is it depends. So males have a bit of a larger home range size. They can go from between 12 and 60 square miles, and females it's pretty tiny, 5 to 7 square miles. They're not moving around nearly as much. They've got cubs, so if they have cubs, it's kind of tough to move pretty far if you've got babies with you. So they kind of stick around in their one little spot where they are. All right, good guesses. Okay, Gabby, you want to take question 4?
Sure. So question number 4, what do black bears eat? So what do you think a black bear eats?
What's on the menu?
Happy little Winnie the Pooh in there.
I love it.
Bird food, definitely. Everything, blueberries, everything, mostly grubs and berries. Trash, small animals, dead animals, fish, berries and insects.
Wow, good guess. All good stuff.
Yep. All right. So you guys are absolutely correct. They'll eat just about anything. They are omnivores. So they eat both meat and vegetation. And I have here with me a bear skull. So this is a replica bear skull, but you can see their teeth. They've got those canines. So they can eat meat, but then they've also got those teeth in the back, the molars, which are very flat, that they can use to grind up nuts and other vegetation. They can clip grass with their front teeth right here. So while they can eat meat, they really eat a lot of berries and insects and nuts. They can hunt or eat small mammals, but they're really just opportunistic about it. They wouldn't eat it unless it was just convenient for them. They're not really designed to chase and to hunt. It's much easier for them to just kind of forage. And their diets consist of a lot of things, but mostly carbs. So they don't have a lot of proteins and fats in their diet. And so they're constantly looking for that. And that's when we have the problem of bears getting into your bird feeders. So it's great for them. They're trash can, there's lots of fatty things in there. So they're just looking for that protein and fat. And that's when we end up getting the bears in the bird feeders. And so we have seen bears in Rhode Island steal bird feeders, destroy bird feeders. And we've gotten a lot of reports from the western part of the state and a lot of reports from Charlestown of bears stealing bird feeders. So they're definitely around and they will do that. So we'll talk about it more later, but there are things that you can do to prevent bears from becoming a problem in Rhode Island. We don't have a lot here yet, but the bears that we get, we don't want them to become problem bears. We want to welcome them and keep them wild. So yeah, they'll definitely eat birdseed. But I also have with me a pile of bear scat. So depending on the season, bears will eat different things. And so their scat will have those different things in them. So some of these have nuts in them. So things like beech nuts, they'd eat in the fall. And then things like berries or grasses, they'd eat in the summertime and spring. But their scat is really big. Obviously, it depends on the individual bear, if it's a bigger bear or a smaller bear. But usually it won't have a lot of hair in it. So if you find scat and it's full of hair, it's probably from something like a coyote rather than a bear. And coyotes can have pretty large scats. So it's not necessarily a bear if it's a big scat. It could be a dog, it could be a coyote. But we'll talk more about kind of where bears might be in the state in just a little bit.
Yeah, you can tell a lot about an animal by looking at its scat. Gabby and I and Amy have all looked at probably a lot of scat as we walk around. So next time you're out on a hike, look for some clues of some animals and who may have been there. So if you look at I love this picture down here with these are beech nuts, this brown square here, and you can see them all in the bear's scat. And those are important. Acorns and beech nuts are very important for bears and other wildlife as well, especially this time of year because they're starting to get all of those things in their stomachs so they can fatten up for the winter. I think this year is a good acorn year. I've been seeing a lot of acorns and also getting hit in the head with them as I walk around. All right, so our last trivia question before we break for just a few questions from everybody, and then we'll turn it over to Amy. So when are bear cubs born? I could not find a Winnie the Pooh gift, so I settled for these really cute baby bears. So we've got a few, we're all over the board here. Spring, late fall, winter, spring, summer.
You could watch that little bear falling for a
on repeat. Yeah. He is very cute. We've got fall, spring. All right, late winter. So we're pretty much like everybody's kind of all across the board here. So our answer is January and February. So Gabby made this awesome little year of the black bear diagram. So if we start in January, we've got our cubs are born in the den, and then they start to emerge from hibernation between March and April. And then in May and June, we have that the second year cubs will disperse. So females will breed every other year because those babies will stay with her for almost 2 years, about a year and a half. So they'll go through hibernation with her, they'll hibernate in the den with her, and then they'll leave. And then once they leave, the breeding season will occur in June and July if she is okay to start breeding again. And then all throughout August, September, October, they start foraging to prep for winter. So this is when they're chomping on acorns and looking for the last of the bird seed in your backyard so they can add all of those fatty foods into their diet. And then like late October, early November, hibernation begins, and they hibernate all the way through the winter. So this is a really cool little graphic just to give you an idea of a year in the life of a black bear. Now I've included some fun photos because I just can't resist baby bears. So when the cubs are born, they're less than a pound. So they're very, very tiny. This picture was taken in Maine. So in other states, Maine, Connecticut, I believe Massachusetts does this as well, definitely Vermont, New Hampshire, basically all of New England will track individual females, and they'll track where she's denning in the winter and tag her, and then go in the den in the winter and pull the cubs out and weigh them and measure them and get an idea of productivity of the state's bear population. So we do not have any breeding bears in the state yet. We're all crossing our fingers that that we do someday, so then we can go do this and hold baby bears and keep them warm as biologists take measurements on them. That's our dream. We'll see if it comes true. But it's pretty cool that they get to do that in other states. Our fur bearer biologist, who is in charge of all of the critters with fur in the state, Charlie, he's been to Connecticut to do this and to kind of observe how they do this. So those babies are weaned at about 7 months, and then they follow mom for about 1.5 years. So she's got some pretty big babies with her before they leave. An interesting thing is that the female cubs will kind of stick closer to mom because they have that smaller home range size. So when they do disperse, they don't go too far, but male cubs will disperse a lot farther. So we had an incident a few years ago where there was a young male bear who was hit by a car on Route 146 in North Smithfield, and unfortunately didn't make it. But that young cub was a young cub. He was about 1.5 years and only weighed about 125 pounds. So he was pretty small. So that indicates that he was dispersing either from Massachusetts, Connecticut area, and just kind of trying to find his way, and ended up here in Rhode Island. So, and Amy, you can talk more about this as well, but it's probably most likely that we have young males, kind of floating into the state, but it's tough to tell if you can't get up close and personal with them. Okay, so before we turn it over to Amy, do we have any questions about the trivia questions? We'll just take a couple of minutes, take a little break. If anybody has any questions, toss them in the chat. Do they fish? That's a great question. So I don't know if our bears here will fish as much. So like grizzly bears, you always see the documentaries of them like catching the salmon in the rapids. I'm not sure if black bears will actively fish. My guess is if they had the opportunity, they probably would. Or if there was, fish washed up somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if they would visit the DEM hatcheries where there may be some fish scales and stuff lying around, and they might be interested in the smells there. Any other questions? Do the moms wake up when the biologists take the cubs? Yeah, so bears are not true hibernators. So something like a woodchuck is a true hibernator. They go into their little den, they're out cold for the winter. You can poke them, you can prod them, they're not gonna wake up. Bears are kind of groggy in hibernation, so they can wake up. So they, what they'll actually do is they'll dart the mother with a tranquilizer dart. So she's totally asleep, and then they can go in and handle the cubs. Are bears hibernating in Rhode Island? My guess is probably not. Amy, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, so based on the timing of some of the sightings that we get, there might be 1 or 2. Just because, we've gotten sightings pretty late into the fall and also super early in the spring from the same area. So that kind of leads us to believe there's maybe a few, but again, they're probably those young males and not necessarily a mom breeding with cubs.
So we've got a couple more questions here. Have there been any changes in the hibernation pattern due to global warming? That's a great question. I do not know the answer to that question. My guess is we need data from other states and like over time to see those patterns, but that's an excellent question.
Well, the bears that would be in, the bears that are in southern states, they don't hibernate for quite as long. So if the weather changed here, I would imagine we could see a pattern of bears maybe coming out more frequently if the weather's not as harsh as it is.
So we've got 2 more questions, and then we'll hand it over to Amy. So one question is, will males kill the cubs to bring the females back into estrus or bring them back towards the breeding season? That I'm not I'm not certain about that because I always think of like lions would do that. You know, when they get into a new pride, they'll kill the babies. But I don't know. The females are pretty solitary and the males are pretty solitary. I think they don't really come into contact with each other, and um, mama bears are pretty pretty defensive of their cubs. Um, and then our last question, and if we don't get to your question right now, we will have time at the end as well to ask lots of questions. And the last question we have here is, can the mom bear smell the humans after on the cubs after they've been handled? So my guess is probably yeah, because they've got a great sense of smell. It's probably their strongest adaptation is their sense of smell. But I don't think that really has an effect on how she cares for the cubs, because they've been doing this in many states for many years and tracking the cubs and the success of the litter. So I think they're probably fine. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Amy to share some stories from the field. I'm so excited because this is some really cool stuff that she's going to share with us.
Cool. So just to back up on the cubs and the humans. So just to explain like why that guy is holding the cubs, that's usually for a den check or for changing a collar. So if a state is collaring and following a female, the batteries don't last all that long. So they'll go into the den in the winter time and they'll anesthetize the female, but it's cold, so they have to keep the cubs warm during that time. So you'll often see these pictures of the biologists cuddling the bears, and that's really not just to get a cute picture, it's to actually keep them warm while the biologists are changing the collars out and just checking on the mom before putting them back. So I know it looks fun, but there's a real scientific reason for that. So here in Rhode Island, as Mary said, we don't have a ton of bears, but other states do. So Connecticut, Massachusetts, so all signs are kind of pointing to we should have bears. So we started this project back in, oh gosh, 2015-ish. Yeah, it's been about 6 years, 5 or 6 years. And we're just trying to see what's going on with the bear populations. All signs are pointing to that we should have them. And a similar project was started in Rhode Island back in 2007, I believe, where they did the same setup and didn't really find that we had many bears here. So we wanted to keep it going and check a little bit further down the road. So you can, next slide, Mary. Cool. So the way we're surveying for bears here in Rhode Island is we're doing something called non-invasive genetic sampling, which is just a fancy way of saying we're trying to catch some bear hair in our bear hair snares. It's a pretty silly name, but it's a really simple setup. So you'll see me here stringing up some barbed wire around some trees. And the idea is that we have this barbed wire and we're hoping to just collect some hair samples. If a bear's in the area, in theory, it would walk past our barbed wire and leave behind a little hair sample that we could bring back into our genetics lab and kind of keep track of the bears that way. And this is a good diagram of what it actually looks like. So we're really just finding a good grouping of trees and stringing up the barbed wire. And in the center, you'll see a little at point A there. There's a little pile of sticks and branches. And what we do there is we put a scent lure. And the idea is that if a bear is in the area, it's gonna catch a whiff of whatever scent lure we put out that week, whatever is on the menu. And in order to investigate that, it'll have to either go over or under the barbed wire and leave behind a tuft of hair. We also get a lot of other critters visiting this, but the idea was to look for bears. And we had a whole variety of things on our menu. Some were smelled a little more delicious to us than others. So we used anise, which is like a licorice flavor, fish oil, smelled like fish, was really gross. We used a caramel flavor, blueberry. The jelly donut was my favorite. It wasn't an actual jelly donut, it was just gel that smelled like jelly donuts. And then there was black magic, which I could never really figure out what exactly it smelled like. It was a little bit like smoke, a little like bacon. So these were all just designed to kind of mimic things that you hear that bears like when they get into like human food. We didn't want to leave out any actual edible things because we don't want to train any bears to get accustomed to human food. So we were using scent lures. So if they would come and investigate, there would be no reward for them coming across, you know, a blueberry gel because they're not getting any nutrition from it. So they would learn like, oh, this isn't, you know, something I need to go seek out and go dig in people's garbages to look for. So we weren't trying to accustom the bears to human food at all. And the take home of the study was that we really didn't get any bear hair in the years that we had it out. So we would run them during the time that a bear was active. If you think back to Gabby's fun little chart there, they're going to be active in the spring through the fall. So we would have them running from usually around Memorial Day through September, and we're going out there every week, checking, adding new scent lure, changing up the flavor. And we didn't get any bear hair, which was kind of disappointing, but it also told us a lot about the population. So I always have to tell the students that work with us as volunteers that, because they get discouraged when they don't find something when they're serving, zeros are data too, and you can learn a lot by not finding what you're looking for, as well as actually finding what you thought you were going to find. So those zeros are telling us that our bear population is still pretty small. So we had 40 sites, and we only had them in the western half of the state. And so what we kind of learned was 40 was too small to be able to detect a bear in Rhode Island. But an interesting thing for another project we were doing, not specifically for bears, we put trail cameras out throughout the whole state, 100 sites. And so that's what all those little purple dots are. And we had those going for, we just wrapped up our 3rd summer of covering the whole state with trail cameras. And in 3 summers, we only got 3 pictures of bears in those 3 locations where the stars are. So that kind of confirmed to us our bear population is still really small. If out of all of those dots, we only got 3 pictures of bears, we're still working with a really small amount of bears in the state. So I just wanted to include some of those pictures that we found. This one's really hard to see, so take a minute and see if you can spot the bear. This was a nighttime photo. And we were using scent lure at this spot. We had it smeared on that big tree there, but we weren't trying to detect bears for this study. We had a scent lure that bears probably wouldn't care about, so he didn't even come and investigate. But if you haven't found him yet, if Mary could circle him, there you go. He's kind of hidden way back there, but definitely a bear. This was a good one. A big bear bottom. He walked right by the camera, but again, was not interested in the scent lure that we used for this project, because again, we were trying to detect bobcats and fishers, not bears. So he just walked right on by. And then the 3rd sighting we had, again, just a guy popping right back, not really spending too much time. So even though we didn't see a lot in our hair snare surveys, like I said, the zeros are data too, and it's just letting us know that even though we know we have bears here, we obviously see pictures of them. People report sightings all the time. There's probably not as many as you would think, just based on the amount of attention they get in the news when someone sees one. So we're still in the early stages. And again, it's probably these young males that are just trying to find their way in life, haven't quite settled on a home range yet. And just to add to that story Mary mentioned about that young male that unfortunately got hit by a car, there was another one in Providence a couple years ago. Do you guys remember this? It found its way to Rhode Island Hospital for whatever reason. Not a good place for a bear to be. So the environmental police officers actually tranquilized it and released it elsewhere in the state that would make more sense for a bear. And then months later, our biologist got a phone call from another biologist in, was it Vermont? That found the tag, because they put a tag on it before they released it. So that bear made its way all the way up to Vermont. So these young males, in trying to find their own way in life, they can move really far.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They, and the Rhode Island Hospital one was a couple years ago, but I think like last year I had seen in the news that one was on, not Reservoir Ave in Johnston. It was in Johnston. It was in like a suburban neighborhood, which I would think that Johnston is not very, there's some wooded spots, but it's mostly, like Atwood Ave and like, like the traffic and a lot of like shopping plazas and stuff like that. So just when you think that wildlife cannot or would not be in an area, there they are, as made evident by the bears and also the Johnston turkeys, which were a hot topic on the news for a couple of weeks. So that being said, with animals, we think that they'd be out on Foster, Chepachet, which there have certainly been sightings there, but there've been sightings in other spots that are a little different that you wouldn't maybe expect. Like this bear here, who made international news. When I was finding this picture, I have it saved somewhere on my computer. I said, I'll just pull it from Google because I couldn't find it on my computer at the time. And I got it from a news service in the United Kingdom. So this made international news, this bear in Narragansett looking into a woman's car as she was gardening. And I actually talked to the lady who took the picture, and super nice lady. She explained to me, she said, okay, I was a little shaken because it's a big animal, obviously. I shut my door and locked it and whatnot. And he was trying to like paw at the door because he was just curious. I mean, you could see, like, she said, look at his face. I mean, he looks just totally curious. He was interested in like the lunch that she had on her passenger seat. She had a peach and some crackers with her. And she said he was just hungry and curious. The headlines, however, said, woman fights off vicious black bear, plays tug of war with bear over car door, who wanted her lunch, had to run and hide in car. And it was like these like terrifying headlines. So that being said, the media likes to get really hyped about these types of things. And I don't say that, she said, I didn't feel like I was in a crazy amount of danger. I felt a little threatened because it's a bear, but not absolutely terrified for my life, as the article would imply. So that's why we say that, not to make people think that they can go and cuddle with the bears. They are very cute. They are charismatic. They are beautiful animals. We love them. We're happy they're here, but they are still large animals and they can be dangerous. So most bears can be scared away by loud noises. Living alongside bears now, this is something that we have to tell Rhode Islanders about and just be ready. So if you see a bear in your backyard, there's no need to be super alarmed if you don't have any attractants in the backyard. So thinking about your bird feeder. So the recommendation is, putting it up in November and removing it by April, because the bears will be coming out of hibernation and wandering around and dispersing in the spring. So if you want to avoid bears coming into your yard and destroying your bird feeder, it's best to just remove it. It's not like, I know people have issues with squirrels getting into their bird feeders. They're like, those darn squirrels, I can't get rid of them. Imagine a bear, so there's really nothing you can do to keep a bear away from your bird feeder. So just removing them is the best option. Thinking about your compost. If you compost anything in your backyard, most of the guidelines say no fatty or oily items anyways, but thinking about what might be hanging around in your backyard, in your compost, or maybe there's pet food outside. There was a bear that was in someone's backyard, I think either in Narragansett or South Kingstown this past year, that was rummaging through the bird seed that was in the container outside. So it was in like a little metal trash can, and they had peanuts outside as well for the birds in that metal trash can. So that's an open invitation for a bear. So keeping things inside where the bears would not be able to get to them is really key. Trash, if you're putting out your trash, maybe put it out in the morning as opposed to the night before, because that's just an invitation as well, not for bears, but even for other critters too. Coyotes are attracted to trash cans. So only putting it out the morning of can be a big help. And all of these things combined can help us live peacefully with bears. It's very possible. They've been in other states for many years without huge problems. So we are very confident that we can have bears here and enjoy seeing them and not have anybody in danger. When bears get dangerous is when they become habituated to being around people. So they know, this backyard has snacks. this person's feeding me because they think I'm cute. And when they start to get comfortable with people, that's when they get dangerous, because that's when you get closer and closer and there could be some sort of encounter. Most black bears are big babies. So you can make loud noises with pots and pans. You can, I always tell people, with coyotes, people are nervous about walking in a neighborhood where there are coyotes, taking a metal soda can and putting some pennies in it and taping the top. It makes a really great noise shaker. You can shake it, you can throw it towards the animal without hurting the animal. Spraying with the hose, loud noisemakers, anything that you can use to scare the bear is great, because that means that they associate people with, I'm afraid and I don't want to be near that person. It sounds mean to do that to animals and say, oh, well, I don't mind them in my backyard, I like animals. But in the long run, it does help our wildlife avoiding those problems, because a lot of times when you have an animal that's large and that could potentially be dangerous, when they become dangerous, that usually means that the animal has to be euthanized, and we don't want that to happen. We never want to see that. That's not something that we enjoy having to do, or the environmental police do not enjoy doing it. So working together and telling people about this too, a lot of people don't know this. So sharing what you know is super, super helpful, because when your whole neighborhood is on board, then it makes a lot more sense. If everybody's scaring the bears or the coyotes or whatever it might be, it helps than if just one person, then the bear walks over to your neighbor's yard and eats all of their birdseed.
So sorry, Mary, I was just going to say, I know we had a lot of questions about, if you're hiking on a trail and you come across a bear, what should you do? And so just like Mary said, I mean, most of the time they can be scared away by loud noises, but basically just, take another trail if you can. What you don't want to do is you don't want to try to run away. Don't approach the bear. And just, if you do see one, you can always report it to us too. We want to know when people are seeing them. So definitely let us know. But yeah, the biggest thing is don't try to climb a tree, don't try to run away, and don't try to approach the bear. Just take a different trail if you can. Act big and loud. Like if you have a coat, you can open it up and spread it out and just yell and stomp your feet, and it should go away. And you can always call the environmental police if you think the bear might end up being a problem if it's acting not afraid of people.
Right. So we can take some more questions now. We've got it's 7:20, so we can take about 10 minutes and end at about 7:30. One thing that I would like to bring up, we put this little logo here, BearWise. This is a great resource that's out of the southeastern US, where there are a lot of problem bears. In campgrounds and stuff like that. But BearWise is a great resource with a lot of answers to questions like, what do I do if I see a bear? Some solutions to living alongside black bears. It's just a really cool resource. So let's take a second I gotta scroll back through the chat to see what we got. Okay.
Feel free to put more questions in the chat if you have more questions.
Okay, all right, so I'm starting with picking up with where Larry was asking a question. Where do they hibernate? This is a great question. So and Amy, if you want to tag on with this as well. So anything that's like a hollow log or like a little kind of cavity underneath some rocks. It's rocky old New England, so there's plenty of crevices that they can find to hibernate. So anywhere where they can really find shelter. Okay, let's see. Another question is, why don't they breed in Rhode Island? So we have females, we have young males, and why aren't they breeding? Why don't we have a breeding population? So Amy, do you want to take this one?
That's a great question, and I don't really know the answer. Yeah, you would think they would be. I think that the majority of bears that we see in Rhode Island are the young males. So if you can think back way to the beginning of the talk when we talked about their home range and how much further the males are moving than the females, once we do get females moving into the state and hibernating here and staying here, we're going to get a breeding population. But I think at this point we don't really have the females because we haven't gotten any definitive evidence of any cubs or anything. So I think what we usually have are those young males that are dispersing from their families at this point.
Yeah, so good question though. We've got a question, who do we contact if we see a bear or a bobcat? Where do we call or email? So I'm gonna put in the chat, we have just a really quick, it's just a quick little form, so it's report wildlife. So it's dem.ri.gov/report wildlife. I just typed that into the chat for everybody. So you can report, it has like a little fact sheet on if you see a frog or a salamander, how do you report it? Turkeys and deer, we have separate surveys throughout the year for those two. And then anything for bobcats, bears, and coyotes, it's just a simple email or a phone call to our office, and both contact forms are there on that nice little fact sheet for you. So we always love getting sightings. Okay, do bears get rabies? So bears could, so I would say that I haven't really heard of many incidences of bears with rabies, but it's possible because they're mammals. So all mammals can contract rabies. Occasionally we get calls of deer with rabies, but it's usually like smaller animals like raccoons, foxes, bats, things like that. But I don't think the incidence is too high.
I'd imagine because the bears don't come into contact very frequently with each other, that it probably would be harder to spread.
Yeah.
They usually don't come into contact with a lot of other animals. They're big, that scare the other ones away.
Yeah, something like a fox is a predator, so it's coming into contact with other little critters or each other. But bears they're not really eating other animals, and they're just kind of want to be left alone. I think they're like, just let me live my life. So yeah, my guess is it's probably pretty low. Will bears tip over trash bins even if the bins are covered? Absolutely. So there are, I've seen it, if you look online, there's like these little clamps that they make for your trash can that are kind of like a rubberized clamp that goes on either side of the lid, so it snaps it shut really tight. It's kind of like if you've seen the Yeti coolers, they're bear proof, so they've got these like lids that lock in place really, really well. So something like that can help your trash bin. But yeah, if they're covered, I mean, if the lid is easily removed, the bear is probably going to get in if something smells really good in there.
So just make sure.
Okay, Gabby, sorry.
I was just going to say, if you wait to put your trash out at the curb until trash day, that'll also help with stopping other animals from getting into the trash can.
Another question, do bears return to places where they were before? Oh, that's a good question. So Amy, do you know if they'll like hibernate in the same dens or?
Yeah, I believe they do go back to the same dens. They don't have to, but some bears will return to the same dens. And once they have an established home range, they're going to hit the same spots that they usually do. And that's going to be amplified if they're finding a human food source. They'll definitely keep coming back. So like we said, you want to make sure you don't have your bird feeders out and your trash out, because then you will certainly get routine visits, which will become problematic.
Thank you for laying out this bird seed breakfast buffet for me. I'll come back for brunch. They always make me laugh, bears, because they're just such large animals, but they will eat bird seeds, like these little tiny seeds. They're just like, with their giant mouth, just like crunching on these little seeds, which just cracks me up. Okay, so our last question at the bottom here, do you think the population will grow? I hope so. That's what Robin is saying. Yeah, we hope so too, Robin. I would say yes. I mean, Amy, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I don't see why not. And we're all, I think, a little surprised that it hasn't grown faster. You know, obviously we started this project 5 or 6 years ago thinking like, oh yeah, it's gonna happen. We're gonna get bears all the time. I mean, it would make sense that bears don't pay attention to state boundaries. Connecticut has a ton of bears. Massachusetts has a ton of bears. But, you know, Rhode Island is also super densely populated, and there's not a ton of habitat. And again, if you think back to how far they move around, they do need kind of a lot of space. So I think the population will grow. I don't think we're ever going to have as many as Connecticut and Massachusetts do, though.
Yeah, we're pretty small because like that whole western side of the state is fairly forested. It's really, you know, a lot of continuous forest based with the management areas and some Audubon properties, there's Nature Conservancy properties out there. There's a lot of conservation land out there, and there's also a lot of privately owned forest on that end of the state. So if we were to have a resident population, my guess is it would be on that western half. I would say central Rhode Island is far too developed. You might get bears wandering in and be like, oh, I'll eat out of this trash can and then go back to the woods. And the East Bay, I think, is also too developed for them. But I think our western half of the state, there's a lot of conservation land. The majority of the state land is over there. But, you know, if people are managing their properties, you know, if they have forested property and they're managing it as forest, that's an open invitation for bears. So that's really good. So we'll see. It remains to be seen. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That brings us to about 7:30, and we want to thank you all so much for joining us. And for folks who want to continue to get updates, we have your email addresses from the registration form if you've indicated that you'd like to be on the monthly email list. We won't spam you. It's just once a month with all of our events that are going on. We have an Instagram and a Facebook page if you're on social media and you'd like some fun wildlife posts to get you through the week. We do a lot of fun stuff and enjoy that. And also just checking out our outreach page where we post events and other resources as well. And also the Wildlife Genetics and Ecology Lab website. So you can see some of the other work that Amy has contributed to, including some New England cottontail stuff, bobcat stuff, and there's even some trout genetic stuff going on, which is pretty cool. So just checking the chat if there's any more quick questions. Last minute questions. No other questions. Thank you guys so much. All right, so we hope you all have a great night. Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna